yeah, yeah. The Amero, the Amero, the Amero. Take me for
Episode 4, Canada's Productivity Problem Explained. Season 2, North America Under Pressure. Welcome back to the kitchen table. Imagine a mid-sized Canadian manufacturing company. Business is growing, so the owner decides to expand. He hires 50 new workers. On paper, this looks like an absolute economic victory. Employment is up. The company's total output has increased. But if you look closer, there is a hidden crisis. The owner didn't buy any new robotics. He didn't upgrade the factory software. He just crammed more people onto the exact same analog assembly line. The total number of widgets produced went up, but the number of widgets produced per worker actually went down. Now, zoom out from that factory and look at the entire country. Canada's population is growing at a record pace. Total employment is up. The headline gross domestic product, the total size of the economy, is growing. Yet, everyday citizens look at their bank accounts, their grocery bills, and their housing costs, and they feel poorer. Why can employment and population grow while your standard of living feels like it is stagnating? We are going to explore the dangerous difference between growing an economy with bodies versus growing it with capital and technology. We will look at why Canadian companies struggle to scale up. We will address a vital counter-argument that productivity data often misses the immense value of public services and quality of life. And finally, we will uncover a hard truth for the Amero movement. Modernizing our digital payment systems will only save us if businesses actually reinvest that saved capital. Whenever economists talk about productivity, people often get offended. They think economists are calling them lazy. But economic productivity has nothing to do with working harder or longer hours. It is simply a measure of how much value is generated per hour worked. If you dig a ditch with a shovel, you work incredibly hard, but your productivity is low. If a bank lends you the money to buy a backhoe, your physical effort drops, but your productivity skyrockets. In Canada, we have a shovel problem. Over the past few decades, Canada has relied heavily on population growth and immigration to fuel its headline GDP. But as Canadian economists have pointed out, growing the total GDP is meaningless if GDP per capita, the actual wealth per person, does not increase. Why is Canada's productivity lagging so far behind the United States? It comes down to a lack of business investment in capital and technology. And ironically, Canada's floating exchange rate is partly to blame. As we discussed in earlier episodes, when the Canadian dollar is weak, Canadian exports become artificially cheaper for Americans to buy. This gives businesses a temporary boost in profits without them having to improve their operations, a phenomenon economists John McCallum and Richard Harris famously identified as the lazy manager effect. But a weak dollar creates a second, more destructive problem. Most of the world's advanced software, robotics, and heavy machinery are priced in US dollars. When the Canadian dollar drops, importing that vital productivity-boosting equipment becomes incredibly expensive. So, what does the Canadian business owner do? Instead of taking out a loan to buy $1 million US robotic system, he takes advantage of the expanding population and just hires cheaper manual labor. The business survives, but productivity drops. Wages stagnate. The standard of living freezes. Furthermore, Canada has an issue with scale. Research by economist John R. Baldwin on the Canadian manufacturing sector revealed a fascinating trend. We often praise small businesses as the engine of the economy, and it is true that they create jobs. But Baldwin's data shows that while small producers dramatically increase their share of employment, they fell drastically behind large firms in terms of output and labor productivity. without the massive capital required to achieve economies of scale. Small firms simply cannot pay the high wages that build a strong middle class. But here, we must pause and look at the counter-argument, because we cannot worship economic data without looking at human reality. Many sociologists and public policy experts argue that raw productivity data misses the broader picture. Yes, the United States has higher GDP per capita and higher productivity, but the US also has millions of citizens without health insurance, higher rates of poverty, and severe social polarization. Canada has chosen a different path. A portion of Canada's economic energy is directed toward maintaining a comprehensive social safety net, universal health care, safer cities, and a generally high quality of life. Standard productivity metrics do not assign a dollar value to the peace of mind a mother feels, knowing she won't go bankrupt if her child gets sick. This counterargument is valid and important. A hyper-productive society is not always a happier society. However, the math is inescapable. You cannot fund first-class public services with third-class economic productivity forever. If Canada does not generate more value per hour worked, the tax base will eventually erode, and the government will be forced to borrow billions just to keep the hospitals open, passing the debt on to our youth. Quality of life requires capital to sustain it. This brings us to the Amero, the future of digital finance, and the role of Korean investors looking to build in North America. We talk a lot on this show about how upgrading to an interoperable finternet using tokenized assets, stablecoins, or a unified digital framework will eliminate cross-border friction. It will save businesses billions of dollars in foreign exchange fees and administrative waste. But those digital savings are just packaging if we do not fix the real economy. Technology and payment modernization will only help Canada if businesses take the capital they save and invest it. If a Canadian manufacturing firm saves $500,000 a year because a digital Amero eliminates currency hedging costs, they cannot just pay that out in executive bonuses. They must invest it in R&D. They must buy the advanced machinery. They must train their workers. A unified digital framework acts as a forcing function. If you remove the crutch of a weak floating currency, Canadian businesses will have no choice but to compete on true innovation and scale. And for global investors, including the dynamic fintech builders in Seoul, this represents a massive opportunity to provide the software and capital that North American businesses desperately need to upgrade their operations. Before we close out the first quarter of Season 2, let's bring this back to the kitchen table with our weekly Q&A. Question 1. Why can employment and population grow while my living standards feel stagnant? Because wealth is a ratio. If the total economic pie grows by 2%, but the population eating that pie grows by 3%, everyone's individual slice gets smaller. When a country grows its economy simply by adding more people without adding more capital, infrastructure, and technology to support them, the infrastructure gets strained. Housing prices explode because of demand, but your wages don't go up because your individual output per hour hasn't improved. Question 2. Why do Canadian companies struggle to grow into massive, highly productive global corporations? It is a mix of high internal trade barriers, a small domestic market, and risk-averse capital. In the US, a company has instant access to 330 million consumers under one regulatory system. In Canada, selling products across provincial borders can sometimes be as difficult as international trade. Combined with the lazy manager effect of a weak dollar, many business owners find it easier to stay small and comfortable rather than taking the massive risks required to compete globally. Question 3. What is the call to action for today? I want to hear from the business owners, the workers, and the investors in our audience. We know that raising productivity is the only way to genuinely raise wages. So drop a comment below. What is the one biggest barrier Canadian companies face today that stops them from investing in new technology and scaling up? Is it taxation? Is it interprovincial trade rules? Or is it a lack of ambition? Let's discuss it in the comments. I'm Chisun Lee. Thank you for seeking the truth behind the money. I will see you next week on the Amero.